to all. My today's topic is drugs acting on autonomic ganglion. So first of all, where is this autonomic ganglion present? As you people might be knowing, autonomic ganglion is available for both parasympathetic as well as the sympathetic nervous system. So if I draw a brain, suppose this is your parasympathetic nervous system, preganglionic neuron, a postganglionic neuron, and lastly your peripheral organ. Similarly, sympathetic nervous system, we have got a small preganglionic neuron and a long postganglionic neuron, and lastly a peripheral organ. So autonomic ganglion is basically present over here, and the receptor present on the autonomic ganglion is a kind of cholinergic nicotinic receptor, that is NN type. Okay, NM type of receptor is present in your skeletal muscle, whereas NN type of the receptor is present in the autonomic ganglion. Okay, so NN receptor is present on the autonomic ganglion for both parasympathetic nervous system as well as for sympathetic nervous system. Alright, so we'll study about the drugs which are acting on this NN receptor for both sympathetic as well as parasympathetic nervous system. Now we can assume that two types of drugs are been available. One drug that increases or it acts as an agonist for NN receptor, and another drug which blocks this NN receptor. So we will divide our study into two parts. First one is your ganglionic stimulants. Ganglionic stimulants. So ganglionic stimulants means these are the agents that will cause activation of NN receptor. And second, we'll study about ganglionic blockers. Ganglionic blockers. Ganglionic blockers means these will mainly cause blockage of this NN receptor. And you know what is the result of this blockade or stimulation? See, if we want parasympathetic action as well as for sympathetic action, for both the cases we require activation of NN receptor. See, these neurons should get activated, and after activation of these neurons should communicate with the second, this postganglionic neuron. Okay, preganglionic neuron should communicate with postganglionic neuron, and the way of their communication is via this NN receptor. When NN receptor gets activated, action potential will be initiated in this postganglionic neuron in both the cases, and once this postganglionic neuron is getting activated, it is able to produce its neurotransmitter on the peripheral organ. They will interact with the receptor and therefore actions will be produced. Okay, so for producing any kind of action, either it may be parasympathetic action or sympathetic action, we require activation of this NN receptor. Okay, so we'll start our study with the ganglionic stimulants. Okay, so we'll start with ganglionic stimulants. So ganglionic stimulants means these are the agents that will cause activation of the autonomic nicotinic receptor, that is your NN receptor. So first of all, we'll see about the classification of drugs. We have got basically two important classes of these ganglionic stimulants. First class is the selective NN receptor agonist, and another class we have got non-selective agents. So first of all, we'll say about the selective nicotinic agonist. Selective nicotinic agonist. So selective nicotinic agonist means they will preferentially cause activation of your nicotinic receptor. And second one, we have got non-selective agents. Non-selective agents. Non-selective agents means they will cause activation of nicotinic receptor, but they are also a kind of agonist for muscarinic receptor also. So non-selective agents are common for both nicotinic as well as muscarinic receptor. Okay, they can activate both nicotinic as well as muscarinic receptor, but these selective agents, they will activate only and only the nicotinic receptors. Now looking at the examples, we have got few examples here in selective nicotinic agonist. The very first or the very simplest form of the example is, as you can see, it is a nicotinic receptor. So the very simple example is your nicotine. Nicotine. But there is a condition and small dose. Small dose. So nicotinic, when it is taken in small dose, it will cause activation of your nicotinic receptor. Okay, this is writing of the small dose is very very important, because when you will study about the ganglionic blockers, that time you will see nicotine at a very high dose will act as a ganglionic blocker. Okay, so nicotine have got dual action. When it is taken in small dose, it acts as ganglionic stimulant, and same nicotine, when it is consumed in higher dose, it will produce ganglionic blockage action. Okay, so the first example is nicotine. Second example is a friend of nicotine, that is lobeline. Next we have got dimethylphenyl piperazinium. Dimethylphenyl piperazinium. Abbreviated as DMPP. Okay. Last example is tetramethyl ammonium. Tetramethyl ammonium, abbreviated as TMA. Okay, so we have got 4 examples under selective nicotinic agonist: nicotine in small dose, lobeline, dimethylphenyl piperazinium, that is abbreviated as DMPP, and lastly we have got TMA, that is tetramethyl ammonium. Okay, so these are the agents that will cause selective activation of your nicotinic receptor, and more preferentially your NN receptor. Next we will see about the non-selective agents. Non-selective agents means these agents can cause activation of nicotinic receptor as well as muscarinic receptor. So very simple example is acetylcholine. Next we have got carbachol, pilocarpine, and lastly we have got anticholine esterases. Okay, so these agents will cause activation of nicotinic as well as the muscarinic receptor. Okay, so these are the classes of drugs which acts as ganglionic stimulants. Next, if we want to see regarding the actions or any indications of these ganglionic stimulants, so these ganglionic stimulants have got no clinical application as such, because see what happens when we stimulate these NN receptor, both parasympathetic as well as the sympathetic nervous system will get activated, and there is no useful purpose that can be served by causing stimulation of both sympathetic as well as parasympathetic nervous system. So currently we have got no use of these ganglionic stimulants. Okay, for some kind of experimental purpose we can use ganglionic stimulant, but clinically there is no use of these ganglionic stimulant, just except your nicotine is mainly used for withdrawing your addiction for smoking or tobacco chewing. See, basically what this cigarettes or your tobacco contains, these agents mainly contains nicotine. Okay, so what we'll do, nowadays nicotinic transdermal patches are been available, and these agents can be used for treating of nicotine dependence and as an aid of smoking cessation. So what will do, any person who is very much addicted to this smoking, so what will do, will apply a nicotinic transdermal patch, and after applying that transdermal patch, slowly nicotine will be moving into the blood circulation, into the systemic circulation, and the person will have a little bit sort of reduced craving, means whatever action the nicotine was been producing after smoking, the same action to a some maximum action can be produced by using transdermal patches. So we can use this nicotinic transdermal patch for cessation of this smoking addiction. And apart from this, we have got no any extra use of these ganglionic stimulants. So this was regarding ganglionic stimulants. Now quickly we'll jump to your ganglionic blockers. Okay, so now we'll start with ganglionic blockers. Ganglionic blockers means these are the agent that really causes blockage of your NN receptor. So this NN receptor can be blocked by two mechanisms, and accordingly we have got the classification of the drugs. So first class is competitive blockers. These are also known as non-depolarizing agent. And second class is depolarizing blocker or persistent depolarizing blocker, we can say. Persistent depolarizing blockers. Okay, or you can also call them as non-competitive blockers. Okay, so first of all we'll see the examples of drugs and later on we'll see the mechanism. Now the examples of competitive ganglionic blockers are, first of all, hexamethonium, next we have got pentolenium, mecamylamine, pempidine, so these are the examples of your competitive blockers. Okay, next examples for persistent depolarizing agent are, yes, as I have told in ganglionic stimulants, yes, nicotine at large dose. And next we have got anticholinesterases in large dose. Now coming to the mechanism of action. First of all, we'll see about the competitive blockers. Very simple enough. Suppose this is your preganglionic neuron and this one is the postganglionic neuron. This postganglionic neuron contains your nicotinic NN receptor. Okay. So from this preganglionic neuron, acetylcholine will be released and they will interact with the NN receptor present post-junctionally, and it will cause activation of this receptor, because of which action potential will be initiated in this postganglionic neuron. This is the normal physiology. Now what happens when we give competitive blockers like hexamethonium? Suppose this is hexamethonium, a competitive blocker. So these competitive blockers will have got some sort of structural analogous to acetylcholine. So this competitive blocker, they will occupy this receptor binding site. They will interact with this receptor, means they will just sit on this receptor and they will not produce any kind of action on this receptor. They will just sit, and when this competitive blockers sit on this receptor, this acetylcholine is unable to bind, or it will unable to activate this receptor. Okay, so these are the competitive blockers. So basically there will be a competition between this acetylcholine and these competitive blockers to combine with the binding site on the receptor. Okay, and whoever is available at higher doses, the action of that thing will only be predominant. Like if the concentration of this hexamethonium is more as compared to acetylcholine, means the action will be ganglionic blocker. But when you apply large amount of acetylcholine, means if acetylcholine is available at higher doses as compared to hexamethonium, means the action of acetylcholine will be predominant over here. Okay, so whatever is present at higher amount, the action of that thing only will be predominant. If acetylcholine is available at higher amount, it will produce action of the ganglion, or you can say it will cause activation of this postganglionic neuron. If hexamethonium or any other competitive blockers are available at higher concentration than acetylcholine, means it will combine with this receptor and it will not produce any conformational changes in this receptor. It will just sit on the receptor silently. There won't be any activity of this drug and there won't be any activity of this receptor as well. When there is no kind of activity of this receptor, then there is no action potential produced in this postganglionic neuron. So there is a kind of discommunication between the preganglionic neuron and postganglionic neuron. So this is the mechanism of action of competitive blockers. So these competitive blockers, basically they will compete with the normal natural agonist, that is your acetylcholine, for the binding site on the receptor. And if or you can say if this acetylcholine is available at higher concentration as compared to the competitive blockers, means they will cause activation of this neuron. But if the concentration of these competitive blockers are more as compared to acetylcholine, then they will cause binding, or they will occupy this receptor binding site and it will inhibit the activation of this postganglionic neuron. So this is the basic mechanism of action of these competitive blockers. These competitive blockers will not produce any kind of damage on this receptor. They will just go and they will sit whenever they are in a higher amount, whenever they are in majority. But when the concentration of these agent is been reduced, then the action will be reversed. Okay, so this is the mechanism of action of your competitive blockers. Now coming to the non-competitive blockers, or you can say persistent depolarizing agent. See, as the name says, depolarizing agent means first of all these agent will cause depolarization. Like taking the same example. Now coming to your persistent depolarizing agent, the very simple example is nicotine as well as anticholinesterases at higher dose. So suppose this is your preganglionic neuron and this one is your postganglionic neuron out of proportion. So what happens when suppose nicotine is been given? Suppose this is your NN receptor. So whenever nicotine is been given, it will bind with its receptor, that is your NN receptor. It will cause increase, or you can say conformational changes in this ion channel receptor, because of which this ion channel will open and there will be influx of sodium ion. Okay, so what happens when sodium ion is being moved inside this neuron? Yes, there will be changes in the potential of this neuron. Like initially this neuron will be at the resting membrane potential of minus suppose 90 millivolt. This is the resting membrane potential. Because of influx of small amount of sodium ion, this resting membrane potential will be dragged to the threshold potential. Suppose minus 70 millivolt was the threshold potential. Once threshold potential is been achieved, it causes opening of voltage sensitive sodium channels and there will be massive influx of sodium ion, because of which the potential will be dragged to more positive side. Means from minus 70 millivolt it will go to minus 60 millivolt, minus 50, minus 40, minus 30, minus 20, minus 10, 0, plus 10, even plus 20. Okay, so the graph will be moving like this, in this manner. Okay, since the negative polarity of this particular neuron has been changed to positive polarity, we call it as depolarization. Okay, and after once depolarization has been attained, this voltage sensitive sodium channel will be closed and it will cause opening of calcium channel and potassium channel. Calcium channel will be open for a very small duration of time, in which there will be influx of calcium ion. So the curve will be little bit in this manner. After some times or in few seconds only, this calcium channel will also be closed and only potassium channel will be open, and there will be outflux of potassium ion, and because of loss of this positive cation from this neuron, the polarity will be moving more again to downwards, that is again to the negative polarity. So since again your negative polarity has been regained, we call it as repolarization. So these things are happening normally. Now what will happen when you are giving nicotine at higher doses? Higher doses will cause persistent activation of these receptor. Persistent activation means there will be persistent opening of this sodium channel. When there is persistent opening of the sodium channel means there will be persistent influx of this sodium ion, and we don't require this much amount of sodium ion in this neuron, because after some times means first of all depolarization occurs, which is followed by repolarization. But when you are giving continuously nicotine at higher doses, what happen, there will be persistent activation of this receptor, and it will be persistently it will cause opening and opening of this receptor, and after some times there will occur refractoriness. Okay, means there will be means consistent depolarization will cause inhibition of this particular receptor. Means after continuous activity of this nicotine, means what is the action of this nicotine, it will cause opening of this sodium channel. So continuous opening of the sodium channel, after some times it will become dormant, means it will not produce any action. As such, what was the action? Just influx of sodium ion, and then there will be depolarization followed by repolarization. But continuous sodium ion influx and continuous influx means it will cause inhibition of this receptor, and there won't be any action. Okay, there won't be no action. No action means it will cause blockage of this receptor. See, this nicotinic receptor require an optimum supply of agonist. It might be acetylcholine or it might be nicotine, but everything it should be available in optimum amount. Okay, this is very much important. When you are providing acetylcholine or nicotine or any other ganglionic agonist at a low dose, it will not produce any action. When given at high dose, it will not produce any action. So for activation of this receptor, you require only an optimum activation. If activation is less than requirement or more than requirement, there won't be any action. So this is the basic concept behind the mechanism of action of this persistent depolarizing agent. So as the name only says, they are persistently depolarizing the receptor. So these agents are persistently causing depolarization of this receptor, and persistent depolarization of N receptor will cause inhibition of that receptor. So this is the basic mechanism of action of this persistent depolarizing agent. When you are giving nicotine at higher dose, it will continuously cause depolarization or activation of this receptor. See, it is a kind of receptor which will get tired after continuous activation. Okay, so same thing happens when you are giving higher doses of anticholinesterase. So what this anticholinesterase will do? This anticholinesterase will mainly cause inhibition of the enzyme acetylcholinesterase. When this enzyme is getting inhibited means there will be increased availability of acetylcholine, and acetylcholine have got same action as that of the nicotine. It will means higher doses of acetylcholine will produce persistent depolarization, continuous depolarization, uncontrolled depolarization, and continuous depolarization will lead to inhibition of this particular receptor. So this is the basic mechanism of action of these ganglionic blockers. Okay, so we have got two types of ganglionic blockers. First one is competitive blockers. We have got first of all competitive blockers. We can also call them as non-depolarizing agents. Next we have got persistent depolarizing blockers. We can also call them as non-competitive blockers. Competitive blockers means they will compete for the binding site on the receptor, whereas persistent depolarizing blockers means they will cause persistent depolarization of the N receptor after some time, because of which these receptor will be getting inhibited. So this is the basic mechanism of action of this ganglionic block. Now next we'll see about the actions of these ganglionic blockers. See, the actions of these ganglionic blockers mainly depends upon the predominant nerve supply. Like we have got few organs where the sympathetic nervous system is more predominant. We have got few organs where parasympathetic nervous system is more predominant. So depending upon that only we can discuss about the actions of these ganglionic blockers. Okay, so basically what will happen, any organ, see, first of all we'll divide it into two parts. First of all we have got parasympathetic nervous system, and next we have got sympathetic nervous system. So first of all, we'll see about the organs where parasympathetic nervous system is more predominant, and then we'll see the organs where sympathetic nervous system is more predominant. In case of parasympathetic nervous system, we have got heart. Okay, heart will receive both sympathetic as well as parasympathetic innervation, but when you compare, it have got more dominant parasympathetic action as compared to sympathetic nervous system action. Next, we have got iris of your eye. We have got more predominant parasympathetic action. We have got ciliary muscle of the eye. Next, we have got intestine. We have got bladder and salivary glands. Okay, so these all organs have got both sympathetic as well as parasympathetic innervation as such, but when you compare the action, parasympathetic action is more predominant in these areas as compared to the sympathetic nervous system. Now coming to the organs where sympathetic nervous system is more predominant, we'll have your blood vessels. Okay, so basically the blood vessel is an area where there will be sympathetic nervous system more predominant as compared to the parasympathetic nervous system. And another area is your sweat glands. Okay, so blood vessels and sweat glands are the area where sympathetic nervous system is more predominant, and these all are the areas where parasympathetic nervous system is more predominant. Okay, so what is the normal action of this parasympathetic nervous system on these areas is, on heart, when parasympathetic nervous system is predominant, it will produce bradycardia. Okay, we are talking about the normal action first of all, and next on iris, it will produce meiosis. On ciliary muscle, it will produce contraction of the ciliary muscle. Okay, so we call it as a what to say, there will be no the image will be fixed for a near vision. Okay, next in the intestine, it increases motility. Next, on the bladder, it will increase the tone of your bladder, increase tonicity, you can say. And lastly, on the salivary glands, it increases the secretion. Okay. Next, coming to the sympathetic nervous system, the normal action on the blood vessel, on your blood vessel is, there will be no vasoconstriction. It will constrict the blood vessels. Okay, so whenever sympathetic nervous system gets activated, the adrenergic receptor present on the blood vessel will produce constriction of the blood vessels. So next, on the sweat glands, it increases the sweating. Okay, so this is the normal actions produced. Now what will happen when you give a ganglionic blockers means, yes, the action will be quite opposite. When you give a ganglionic blocker like increased concentration of nicotine or increased concentration of anticholinesterases, the actions produced are over here. It will produce tachycardia. Next, it will produce mydriasis. Next, on the ciliary muscle, it will cause relaxation of the ciliary muscle, which may lead to cycloplegia, that is blurring of vision. Next, on the intestine, it will decrease the motility. On the bladder, it decreases tone of bladder. And it will reduce the salivary secretion also. So it may lead to xerostomia. Okay, so apart from this, when on the sympathetic supply, Means on the blood vessel the sympathetic supply is more predominant as compared to parasympathetic supply, and when you give ganglionic blockers on the blood vessel it will produce vasodilation, and on the sweat glands it will reduce sweating. So these all are the actions produced by your ganglionic blockers. Okay, so actions of ganglionic blockers mainly depends upon the nerve supply. Okay, because basically ganglionic blockers, these agents can block both sympathetic as well as your parasympathetic actions as such. So as you can see in this diagram, when you block these NN receptor, okay, when you block these NN receptor, there won't be any communication of these parasympathetic neurons with your peripheral organ and sympathetic neuron with the peripheral organ as such. So there these both neurons are been getting inhibited. Okay, so suppose you have got any organ, suppose you have got heart have got both parasympathetic supply as well as sympathetic supply, and these agents are blocking both the supply. So what might be the action on the heart? The action on the heart really depends upon the supply, means whatever is supplied is predominant and that is being getting inhibited. Like in case of heart, the parasympathetic supply is more predominant as compared to sympathetic supply. So the actions which was produced by the parasympathetic inhibition will be inhibited. Okay, so the action of the parasympathetic nervous system on the heart was to produce bradycardia, and when you give these ganglionic blockers it will produce tachycardia. Okay, so these are the main thing. Okay, so whatever organ is getting any nerve supply in predominant amount, that is getting inhibited in case of ganglionic blockers. Okay, so these all are the actions produced by your ganglionic blockers.